Today I'm going to tell you the story of a prisoner who, apart from being an excellent car salesman, was also a high-ranking officer in the Air Force. He had received special training in the anti-terrorist department. Although he tried to escape from prison several times, the method he used the last time was so unique and bizarre that neither the guards nor the jailer had the slightest clue. He didn't dig any tunnel, nor did he harm any guard. After quietly escaping from the prison, he even changed his disguise, because of which the police kept searching for him but couldn't catch him. So, who was this prisoner? What was the reason that, despite being a high-ranking officer in the Air Force, he was forced to break out of prison? And did he ever get caught by the police after this jailbreak? What you're about to learn will leave you astonished. The mastermind behind this jailbreak was Richard Lee McNair, born on December 19, 1958, in southwest Oklahoma. Richard's father's name was James, and his mother's name was Willie. He was the eldest among 4 brothers. Since Richard's father was in the police, the family often had to shift from one city to another. Eventually, after requesting a permanent transfer, they settled in Duncan, in Stevens County. Richard's parents gave all their children a good education and also made them hardworking. That was why, after completing his studies, Richard did many different jobs, from construction work to becoming a radio announcer. Doing so many different jobs developed a special skill in Richard. He could learn any task quickly and easily. But after working for a while, Richard realized that these jobs didn't pay enough. So he started selling cars. By the age of 19, Richard moved to Edmond and took admission in Central State University to study criminal justice. However, he soon realized he couldn't pursue those studies, and within just 6 months he dropped out and went back to selling cars. At 21, Richard's parents arranged his marriage to a girl named Dorothy. But this marriage lasted only a year and a half because Dorothy wanted children, and Richard was firmly against it. After this marriage broke, something changed inside Richard, and his interest in criminal activities and weapons grew. Because of this, he even started carrying a gun. Once, he was sent to jail for stealing a car and setting it on fire. That was when he decided to leave the path of crime and join the Air Force, where he was trained in military police and anti-terrorist operations. This training later proved very useful when he stepped back into the world of crime, and when he escaped from prison. After training, Richard was posted in the city of Minot, North Dakota, where he performed his duty with dedication. However, he picked up a bad habit, drinking alcohol. When he realized that alcohol was ruining his health and stomach, he gave it up. Because of this change in himself, Richard began excelling in his undercover operations. He received many medals, and his rank kept increasing. But all of this was like a beautiful dream, one that was about to end soon, and the biggest reason for that was Richard himself. In 1987, during a party, Richard got into a fight in which his left arm was badly injured. This marked the beginning of the downfall of his military career, which eventually turned him into one of America's most wanted prisoners. Since the fight was with another soldier from his battalion, the Air Force suspended him for some time and ordered an inquiry. During this investigation, the team found stolen items in Richard's possession, which he had taken from the military camp. This put a stain on his career. All his medals were taken back, and he was demoted from a high-ranking officer to a clerk. This hit Richard hard, and he started shoplifting small items, not for money, but for fun. He never sold the stolen goods, he would just hide them somewhere. But during one such theft, something happened that changed his life forever. On the afternoon of November 17, 1987, Richard broke into an office to steal. This was the office of Farmer Union Elevator Company, where agricultural seeds and chemicals were kept. As Richard was opening the safe, he felt the urge to use the restroom. When he returned, he sensed that a small truck had stopped outside, with 2 men inside, 47-year-old Jerry Thies and 31-year-old Dick Kisman. They were completely unaware of what was happening around them and what was about to unfold. By the time Richard reached the door to grab his bag, Dick had already gone upstairs. Dick sensed something was wrong because the security gate, which should have been closed, was open, and a bag was lying nearby. As Dick opened the office door and turned on the lights, Richard fired at him. The shot missed but grazed Dick's ear and shattered a nearby window. Startled by the sudden attack and the grazing bullet, Dick fell to the floor, crying out in pain. Richard stood right in front of him and fired 4 more shots. Strangely, Richard's aim failed again, only 1 bullet hit Dick, causing him to bleed. Pretending to be dead, Dick lay still, while Richard assumed he had killed him and left, thinking Jerry must have fled after hearing the gunshots. But Richard's guess was wrong. As soon as Richard stepped out of the office, Jerry called 911 to report the incident. Meanwhile, something happened that cost Jerry his life. While talking to the police, Jerry heard gunfire. As he turned, he saw Richard, about 15 feet away, sitting in his truck and shooting at him. Before Jerry could react, a bullet struck his chest, killing him on the spot. Later that night, Richard went to his girlfriend's house. Shockingly, his girlfriend was a nurse at the hospital where Dick had been admitted after the shooting. Police immediately began searching for the man behind the shooting and suspected he was the same person responsible for several burglaries in recent months. 3 months passed, but Richard was still at large, until the police discovered a place where Richard kept all his stolen goods. Richard had rented an isolated spot to hide his loot, unaware that this would lead to his arrest. From that place, police recovered items stolen from the Air Force Base and also found a photo of Richard. Based on this evidence, on February 16, 1988, police arrested him for the first time. The police didn't want Richard to know they were about to arrest him, so they called him to the station, saying they needed him for an undercover operation. During questioning, once they were sure Richard was hiding something, they arrested him, handcuffed him, and left him alone. At that moment, only 2 officers remained in the station, resting at their desks. Taking advantage, Richard pulled a lip balm from his pocket, used it like grease, and slipped his hands out of the cuffs. On his way out, he grabbed one of the police jackets hanging there, and luck favored him, he found car keys in its pocket. He ran straight to the station's parking lot, where the key fit the 3rd car, and he drove off. But not long after, the car stopped because it ran out of gas. Richard abandoned it and ran toward a building. A patrolling officer spotted him and chased him. To escape, Richard jumped from a 2nd-floor window of the building, thinking he could grab a nearby tree. This time, luck failed him, he fell straight to the ground, injuring himself badly. Police caught him and took him to a hospital. After treatment, he was sent to the Ward County Jail. A few months later, Richard's trial began. He was sentenced to 35 years for the murder of Jerry Thies, the attempted murder of Dick Kisman, and multiple thefts. On July 22, 1988, Richard was transferred to the North Dakota State Penitentiary to serve his sentence. Upon arrival, he was separated from other inmates and placed in a special cell because authorities believed he might try to escape and could kill another inmate. After all, he had murdered a police officer and escaped from a station. This earned him respect from both inmates and guards, allowing him to establish a strong position inside the prison. While in jail, Richard began writing articles about prison life for a newspaper, building a good reputation. It seemed Richard was now moving toward the right path, ready to give his life a new turn. But no one knew that Richard was preparing to execute one of the most brilliant jailbreaks in America. Richard understood well that, unlike other inmates who could get parole early, it wasn't possible for him, it would take years because he had murdered a police officer. So, he decided to escape. He began planning and involved another inmate named Randall Heisch, who was serving a life sentence. They met in the prison workshop, where they worked with other inmates making road signs, furniture, and trash bins. Both knew that a large exhaust pipe ran through the prison and out to the outside, the perfect escape route. They agreed that Randall would monitor the guards and everything else, while Richard would cut through the security hardware of the exhaust pipe. They first stole a cutter from the maintenance room, but it wasn't powerful enough. So they planned to steal a plasma cutter to slice through the pipe. Their escape was set for a Monday morning. But before executing the plan, Richard made a mistake that ruined everything. He and Randall included another man in the plan, and word spread through the prison. They were caught, placed in separate cells, and their sentences were extended. Yet, despite all this, Richard didn't lose hope, and his intention to escape from prison kept becoming stronger. While spending time in his cell, Richard once again began writing articles for newspapers. These articles were about prison life, for which he had to take photos of different buildings and sections of the prison. During this time, construction was going on inside the prison for a new education department building. To take photos of this building, Richard went there, and from here, the idea of escaping from prison again came into his mind. Now Richard began to examine this building very carefully, where he discovered that there was a big gap between the roof and the ceiling, which would be used to install the AC plant. Richard felt that if he could crawl inside that gap and reach its opening, he could get out of this prison. This time Richard and Randall decided that they would not include a third person in their plan because they did not want to repeat their mistake. But, one night before escaping, they again included a prisoner in their plan, whose name was Rick Holland. The reason behind including this prisoner in the plan was that he had a military background, and once they got out of prison, he could be very useful to them. During all this planning, the task given to Randall was to find the place from where all three could crawl inside the gap between the roof and the ceiling. In just 2 days, Randall found the opening of this ceiling, which had been closed with an AC duct. They could easily remove its grill and crawl inside. In this new education department, there was also an entertainment room where a TV and VCR were placed, and prisoners could sit and watch movies. And this was the room where the opening of the AC duct was located, through which they could crawl into the ceiling. Now the biggest question in front of Randall was, when all the prisoners would sit together to watch a movie, how would the three of them crawl into the ceiling in front of everyone? To deal with this, a brilliant idea came into his mind. On the night of the escape, i.e. October 9, 1992, Richard, Randall, and Holland went to that same entertainment room and played a movie in the VCR that all the prisoners had already watched twice. This clearly meant that no prisoner would come to watch this movie for the third time. And that's exactly what happened. 3 or 4 prisoners came into the entertainment room, but when they saw Richard and his companions watching that movie, they went back. A little later, when Richard and his companions were sure that no one would come, they locked the door of the entertainment room from the inside and removed the grill of the duct. One by one, they crawled inside the ceiling. Crawling through the ceiling, the 3 of them came out into that prison ground known as the kill zone, which clearly meant that if any prisoner was found in this area without authorization, he would be shot on the spot. The 3 were crossing that ground, moving toward the prison fences, when suddenly a guard came toward them and asked what they were doing there. During the questioning, the guard informed other guards as well. Suddenly, Richard and his 2 companions ran toward the fences, jumped over, and escaped. After escaping from prison, the 3 decided to split up so that the guards and police would not catch them. But their assumption proved completely wrong. Meanwhile, the prison guards also chased them, and the first prisoner who got caught was Holland, because while running, he injured his leg and could not go far. The second prisoner who was caught was Randall, whom the guards caught with the help of the police. But the mastermind of this escape, Richard, after getting out of prison, stole a car and managed to escape. Sitting in that car, Richard headed toward South Dakota, constantly changing his location. He even changed his appearance so that no one could recognize him. During this time, he got a job taking care of horses in a stable, and sometimes he would go to Dunker to meet his family. Now it had been 9 months since Richard had escaped from prison, and he began to feel that the police and prison authorities had stopped searching for him. Then he decided to start stealing again. But this mistake proved very costly. On the night of July 5, 1993, he entered a car showroom to steal. However, the alarm there went off, causing a crowd to gather outside, and within minutes, the police arrived and arrested Richard. Upon arrest, the police discovered that Richard was none other than an escaped prisoner. After that, he was sent back to North Dakota prison and from there to Minnesota prison. It was very famous about the Minnesota prison that no one could escape from there. As soon as Richard realized this, he decided that he would not escape from this prison but would do something here so that he would be sent back to North Dakota prison. Richard was still making all these plans when, during this time, he was sent to Florence prison in Colorado, from where escaping was impossible for any prisoner. Richard understood very well that he could never escape from this prison. But one day, while working, an idea came into his mind, because of which he even escaped from this prison, from where escaping was considered impossible. Richard's name had never been linked to drugs or any criminal gang, and he was also very good with his hands and feet. This was the reason why he was given work in that department of the prison where large U.S. mail service mailbags were repaired. These mailbags were so big that a man could easily fit inside. Seeing this, a spark lit up in Richard's eyes, and he began planning his third escape. Along with repairing these mailbags, Richard also started making a new mailbag in which he could easily fit. He set this mailbag on metal rods, covered it with a large plastic, and put a zipper on it. After weeks of hard work, the mailbag was ready, and Richard could easily unzip it to get in and out. Now Richard kept waiting for the day he would get a chance to escape from this prison. That opportunity came in April 2006, the day when the repaired mailbags were to be sent out of the prison. As usual, Richard reached the warehouse at 7:20 in the morning to start his duty. He got himself checked at the gate, changed into his uniform, and started his routine work. After a while, he hid in a corner of the factory and waited for the mailbags to be taken out. As soon as they started loading these mailbags onto transport vehicles, he quietly climbed inside the mailbag he had made and zipped it from the inside. Because these mailbags were also checked by hitting them with a stick from above, Richard put a lot of cotton over himself after sitting inside so that he wouldn't get hurt during checking and so that no one would suspect anything. After all the mailbags were loaded onto the truck, they were taken to the gate, where they were checked by hitting from above, and then this truck was sent to the U.S. Mail Service warehouse. After reaching the warehouse, all these mailbags were loaded onto forklifts and taken inside the warehouse. Now Richard had escaped from prison and reached the U.S. Mail Service warehouse. The most important task ahead of Richard was to get out of this mailbag without being noticed by the workers and to run away. Soon, Richard got his chance. After a while, the lunchtime siren sounded in the warehouse, letting Richard know that the staff had gone for lunch. This was the opportunity Richard had been waiting for. As soon as the staff left for lunch, the warehouse was completely empty. There was only one guard sitting at the front gate, and no one was at the back gate. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Richard unzipped his mailbag, came out, and walked out of the warehouse. However, Richard was completely unaware of where this warehouse was, but now he was breathing in the open air. He had become the first prisoner in the history of Florence prison to escape. Although Richard had gotten out of this prison, the cat-and-mouse game was yet to begin. After escaping, Richard stole a car and headed for Louisiana. After driving for a few hours, a police officer named Carl Broadland stopped Richard's car. Carl asked Richard his name, to which Richard replied that his name was Robert Jones. Then, before Carl could ask another question, Richard himself asked the officer if he wasn't supposed to be somewhere else at that time. Carl replied that there was nothing like that and then asked Richard for his address. In response, Richard told the officer that he had come there for some construction work and was staying in a nearby hotel called Titus Inn. Throughout this questioning, Richard remained very calm and answered every question very comfortably because even a little nervousness could have made the police suspect him. Carl, on the other hand, was completely unaware that he was questioning a murderer and an escaped prisoner. After some questioning, when the officer was convinced that everything was fine, he let Richard go. After leaving there, Richard crossed the American-Canadian border and went to British Columbia. But while driving in British Columbia, the police stopped his car again. This time, the police were stopping vehicles and questioning them as part of an investigation into a stolen car. For this reason, they questioned Richard as well. He calmly and comfortably answered all the questions. Once again, the police had no clue that the man they were questioning was an escaped prisoner, and they let him go. After spending some time in British Columbia, Richard returned to America to meet his family and then went back to Vancouver, Canada. Now several months had passed since Richard's escape, and by 2007, his wanted posters were everywhere across the US and Canada. This was why it was becoming increasingly difficult for him to hide from the police. Richard understood very well that if he stayed in one place, he would get caught. That's why he began stealing cash and cars from different places so he could keep changing his location. Due to the continuous car thefts, the police began receiving many complaints, which eventually led to Richard's capture. On the afternoon of October 24, 2007, a police officer was patrolling on his bike when he noticed a white van. After seeing the number plate, he checked a list of stolen vehicles he had, and one number matched this plate. The officer immediately stopped the van, and the most surprising thing was that the person sitting inside was none other than Richard. During questioning, the police officer discovered two things. First, the van was stolen, and second, Richard was the escaped prisoner whose wanted posters were everywhere. As soon as this was revealed, the police officer immediately arrested Richard and took him into custody. After keeping Richard in a Canadian Atlantic prison for a few days, he was handed over to the US, where this time he was sent to a Supermax prison. It is said about the Supermax that the world's most dangerous criminals are kept there, including El Chapo. The status of this prison is equal to Alcatraz, where escaping for any prisoner was almost impossible. This was the story of the prisoner who escaped not once but 3 times, making him a famous name throughout the US and Canada. But today, he is still spending the rest of his life in that same prison, in a 12-by-9 cell. How did you like this story? Write in the comments section and let us know. Like and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.